Do you really need to buy a full-frame camera to get high quality and professional results from your footage? In this video, I'm going to break down the differences between full-frame versus crop sensors and show you how you can get footage that looks just as good from an APS-C camera like the Sony ZV-e10 as you can get on more expensive full-frame cameras. And make sure you just stay to the end of the video, because not only am I going to demonstrate the differences for you, I'm actually going to bring you on set to the professional film that we shot using the Sony ZV-e10 so you can see what a camera like this can do in the real world. Now, what exactly is the difference between APS-C and full-frame cameras? The first thing that you'll want to know is that there's not only these two different types of camera sensors. There's plenty of smaller ones like the sensors we have in our smartphone cameras, the 1-inch sensors that are usually seen in drones, and micro four thirds cameras. And there's also bigger ones called medium format and large format. But APS-C and full-frame are the most common and widely used sensor sizes for consumer and prosumer cameras like the ones that Sony makes. But before we talk about which one you should get, let's talk about the differences in image quality caused by the different sensor sizes. Now in front of you, I have two types of cameras. First is the Sony ZV-e10, which is one of the most affordable APS-C cameras from Sony. On the other hand, I have here the Sony a7S III, a full-frame camera which is almost 5 times the price compared to the Sony ZV-e10. If you look closely, you'll immediately notice that APS-C cameras have smaller sensors, coming in at 24 by 16 millimeters. On the other side, full-frame sensors are sized to be identical to match the 35 millimeter film format standard. Usually, cameras with crop sensors are more compact and lightweight, making them more portable and convenient for various situations, particularly for filmmakers who are doing a lot of run-and-gun films who prioritize mobility. The term crop factor simply refers to the ratio of the smaller sensor to the larger one. Full-frame cameras have a crop factor of 1x. That means that there's just no crop factor applied to the field of view or focal length when using full-frame sensors. On the other hand, APS-C sensors typically have a crop factor of 1.5, but in Canon cameras it is 1.6. That means that when using the same lens on different sensors, the APS-C sensor captures a smaller field of view compared to the full-frame sensor, which looks cropped in, and that's why it's called a crop sensor. When you compare these images, the crop has an effective magnification of 1.5 times. That means that while I was using a 50mm lens for both cameras, the APS-C sensor made it look like I was using a 75mm lens because 50 times 1.5 is 75. The pro to this is that crop sensors give you much more reach for the same lenses. On the other hand, there's depth of field and bokeh. In simplest terms, depth of field is the area in front of and behind the focal plane that appears sharp to our eye, while on the other hand, bokeh refers to the aesthetic background blur that makes a lot of shots a lot more appealing, forcing us to focus our attention more on the particular area of the image that's in focus. Full-frame cameras have larger sensors, which makes it easier to get the shallow depth of field compared to APS-C cameras. So the question that everybody wants to know, do you actually get more background blur with a full-frame camera? Well, the answer is yes, but probably not the way you'd think. For comparison, I shot a shot using an APS-C camera and a full-frame camera with the same lens and the same aperture to see what the differences are. Can you spot the difference? Yeah, obviously the image from the APS-C camera looks cropped in because I used the same lens, but you can't really tell that there's any difference when it comes to background blur. Okay, we saw both cameras with the same lens and aperture, but that's not really fair because you never just deal with the image being so cropped in the real world. So I'm gonna take another shot with the APS-C sensor zoomed out so that it's the same framing as the a7S III. You can see now the APS-C sensor has quite a bit less background blur. So full frame is just better then because it lets you get a blurrier background, right? Well, not exactly. Lenses for crop sensor cameras are a lot cheaper, which means that you can buy a lens with a lower aperture for the same price or cheaper than the full frame equivalent. So if we just stop down the aperture on the ZV-e10 to get f1.4, you can see that it looks just as good, if not better, than the a7S III shot at f2.8. One thing that's often discussed in regards to sensor sizes is the overall image quality they produce. To illustrate, for the same number of megapixels, a full-frame camera will have larger pixels than APS-C sensors, so obviously it's going to be able to capture more light because of the larger surface area. Larger sensors tend to have less noise, and they also usually have more dynamic range, which is the ability to recognize the difference in tones from light to dark of different images. So, because many would say that full-frame cameras are better in low-light conditions and produce better image quality, but in general, I wouldn't really say that. Maybe a few decades ago that was true, but now, not really. Honestly, there's a lot of crop sensor cameras that are superb at low light, and there's a lot of crop sensor cameras that also is not good in low light, but it's never the sensor's fault. In Sony's case, it's because they position their APS-C cameras as less expensive, so they just don't put the higher end features in them like high ISO capabilities. But that's not because they couldn't do it, it's just because that's how they've positioned themselves from a marketing perspective. And of course, the last thing that we'll look at in this video is price. We can talk specs all day, but in reality, price is one of the major considerations that makes the decision for most people. Now, if you're trying to run a business and actually make money from your filmmaking, the ROI on APS-C sensor cameras is way faster and better than anything you're gonna get using a full frame camera. If you buy a full frame camera with a few good lenses, it's probably gonna end up costing you $5,000 or more, where on the other side, you can get away with a top of the line APS-C camera with maybe $1,000 or $2,000 for both the camera and a bunch of lenses. For instance, my recommendation would be get the Sony ZV-e10 or maybe the a6700 with a Sigma Prime lens trio, the 16-30 and 56mm f1.4 lenses. And all of that all together is only going to end up being half of the price of the Sony a7S III alone without any other lenses, SD cards, or other accessories. APS-C cameras are often much cheaper and the lenses for them are as well. Full frame cameras are just more expensive, but this increase in quality usually isn't reflected in the picture quality. Instead, you're usually paying for extra features like dual card slots, additional record settings, and more weather sealing, which all add to the cost of the camera and the lenses for them. But in reality, there's several crop sensor cameras like the a6700 and FX30 that pretty much have the same professional features as the a7S III and FX3. But since they're crop sensors, they're absolutely a lot cheaper. So honestly, for a lot of filmmakers, regardless of your level of experience in the industry, chances are that crop sensor cameras are just a better choice for you. I mean, most of the cameras that they use in Hollywood aren't full frame anyway. Most of them are just some variation of an APS-C sensor. With that said, I just want to make one thing clear. Using a full frame camera is not going to make your work better. Full frame is not better than APS-C or vice versa. At the end of the day, they're just different. You can achieve an awe-inspiring quality picture on an APS-C camera or a full frame camera because at the end of the day, it really isn't the camera that makes an incredible film. Like I said, most Hollywood films are shot on APS-C cameras after all. In reality, it's the filmmaker who makes a powerful, awe-inspiring film regardless of what camera or equipment they have access to. And that's why we put our money where our mouth is to shoot a film using the Sony ZV-e10. Our mission with the film was to prove once and for all that you don't need expensive cameras or equipment to make the kind of professional cinematic films you see in theaters. And when we did it, we shot a behind-the-scenes feature analyzing every step of the process that we took to make the film so that others like you can do the same. In that BTS feature, we go over everything from the lights we use in the film to how we shot it to give it that cinematic edge that we all want for our projects. We also dive into all the challenges we faced shooting a film on this camera and how we overcame those obstacles to make the film into the best end product that we could. If this sounds interesting to you, you can watch the behind the scenes feature along with the film itself by clicking the first link in the description of this video.